Welcome. My name is Tom Tock. I'm the Director of Future Ed at Georgetown University, and we are pleased to partner with Educators for Excellence and TeachPlus to host this afternoon's panel discussion with 6 outstanding educators about their teaching experiences during the pandemic, an extraordinary moment in the educational life of the nation. Let me introduce first our panelists. Shayna Boyd is a middle school English and social science teacher teaching virtually at Ashburn Community Elementary in Chicago, where she also helps develop policy recommendations for the Chicago Public Schools through Educators for Excellence. Danielle Elena is teaching 6th grade English virtually at Corey Hunter Middle School in LA and is a TeachPlus teaching policy fellow. Jamita Horton is teaching 3rd grade elementary school teacher, also working virtually at Rocky Mountain Prep Southwest, which is a charter school in Denver, and she is a TeachPlus teaching policy fellow also. Michael Loeb is with us. He's teaching both in person and remotely at the 7th grade level in science at the Urban Institute of Mathematics, which is a traditional public school in the Bronx, New York, where he is a United Federation of Teachers chapter chair, and he serves on the Educators for Excellence Board of Directors. Nafisa Mohammed is with us from Minneapolis, where she teaches English remotely at Patrick Henry High School and is a member of Educators for Excellence. And finally, Takeru Nagayoshi is with us from Boston, or New Bedford, I should say, where he's an English teacher teaching both remotely and in person at New Bedford High School. He is a TeachPlus teaching fellow, and he's also the 2020 Massachusetts Teacher of the Year. So we have 90 minutes this afternoon, and we're going to start with a panel discussion and then bring you, the audience, into the conversation via questions in the Q&A tab on your Zoom screen. It's on the bottom navigation, just under the photos there. And you should feel free to add questions at any time. We will be collecting them, and then in the last sort of 30 minutes of the session, more or less, we'll take as many questions as we can. So please share your insights and questions as you'd like. Nafisa, let me start with you. The question everybody has is sort of, how's teaching morale? And so I'm wondering what morale is like in your Minneapolis high school, where everybody is teaching virtually.
Just speaking to my school in particular, we have really supportive admin who are fighting with us to make sure that teaching is equitable, to make sure that we're not overburdened as teachers and the students aren't overburdened or feeling overwhelmed, but also receiving a quality education. So, there are, entities, the school district, who see differently or feel like the teaching and learning experiences look differently. But for our admin, they hear us out, they try to make concessions. They've given us time to step back and have an asynchronous day so that we can plan and look at the data going forward as well. So they've been very supportive within my building.
So everybody's enthusiastic about coming to school every day.
Not enthusiastic to come. No one is enthusiastic, I would say. But the students give us really good energy. When we look at their surveys and they say that they feel supported, the students feel like we care. That energizes us to help us feel like we're doing the right thing by our students. But there's various learning curves when it comes to technology. When it came to even grading, we were in a tough spot because, the traditional way of grading was inequitable anyways. And so now we have this system where we don't know exactly what's going on with the student, where their mental health is at. We don't want to discourage them and encourage them to just keep showing up and keep trying. And so grading, we have a quarter system. And so at the end of the quarter that just ended a couple of weeks ago, endless meetings around what are we going to do. or like
So challenges for sure. Yeah,
Mhm.
let's come back to those. Jamita, what about at your Denver Charter Elementary School, which is also a virtual environment this fall? How's morale?
Well, I would say actually, to clarify, when people ask me, am I virtual or am I in person, or is our school virtual or is it in person? It has very much depended on the numbers with COVID in Denver. So our school is very responsive to what those numbers are. So to like give you an example, I was supposed to be back in person starting on October 23rd. So I had my classroom ready. It was, we were ready to go. And then they were like, no, the numbers are going up. You're going to have to say virtual. So just to give context around that. So as a result, they have been talking to parents a lot about what their preference is for their students, whether or not it's supposed to be in person or they want their students to be virtual. So as a result, there's 3 teachers for every grade level. One of them has remained remote, and then the other 2 are on call to be in person.
And how has that affected morale, that sort of uncertainty and sort of a new model that you're dealing with?
Well, it's stressful. And it can create a lot of anxiety, but I think that that's just the nature of this time. There's a lot of uncertainty on what's to come and what the school year is going to look like here on out. But I will say that admin has been very responsive to what we need as educators. And so if we're getting a lot of emails saying like they need us to do X, Y, and Z, and they can read the room and say, okay, maybe you don't need to have a professional development about this. Maybe your time is better given back for you the lesson plan. So I will say like there's a responsiveness, and there's just always flexibility between admin and students and families based on what we feel is needed at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Daniel, how are teachers doing in LA?
Yeah, I was nodding my head as Nafisa and Jamita were sharing, because I think our admin has also been very supportive and responsive. But I'll say this, we're especially excited about Thanksgiving break right around the corner. So I'll keep it real in that sense. And I know we'll talk about some of the factors later, but what makes most of us excellent teachers is our persistence to problem solve. But there's so many factors that are outside of our control right now, or factors that we're learning how to control better and manage better. So yeah.
All right, fair enough. Thanks. Mike, you're teaching both in-person and remote classes in New York City. What's keeping you up at night this year?
I would say a lot of things are keeping me up at night this year.
You don't have little kids, do you?
I don't, although my wife and I are expecting a little one in February. So
That's likely to keep you up too, just saying.
I've heard that from a few people. Yeah. So anticipating bringing a child into the world with COVID probably still with us. But anyway, more immediately, I would say as a New Yorker, I still feel a bit shell-shocked. It's hard to put into words how horrible it was in New York City in March and April. I mean, literally, I would hear ambulances every 10 minutes bringing people to the hospital. And that is something the city felt for a long, long time. So reopening schools in the fall, there was a lot of trepidation around health and safety, as of course is true around the whole country, but it was really stinging in New York. I think my school and our community, school communities in general have done a nice job around maintaining safety of students and staff, and that's really a positive. What's really keeping me up though is our neediest students. And, typically in a pre-COVID world, when we talk about our neediest students, we think of students with special needs. We think of students learning English as a second language. I'm certainly concerned about them, but I've found a whole new category of student who is struggling with learning fully remote. And I teach some kids who are in person, but also fully remote, as you mentioned. And so the ones that are fully remote who fall into a cute couple categories, I'm mostly concerned with. So some of them are home alone. Their family, their parents are working the whole day, and they're left to manage themselves. As
How old are the kids?
I'm a 7th grade teacher, so
Right.
these are 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds. Many of them are taking care of their younger siblings. I've seen on a number of occasions, I'm teaching a student and they have to pause and get up and go take care of their 3-year-old little brother in the other room. And, I'm expecting, academic achievement and high performance and all this, but obviously I have to be very understanding of this challenge they face. And this was not necessarily the front of my mind of a concern going in. And the other thing I'll just add is there's been a huge push for getting devices in the hands of all of our students in New York City. Right. I think our city's passed out some 300,000 iPads, laptops, which is awesome. But now there's a new problem, which is Wi-Fi is very, very poor. And so we just handed out a bunch of printers to our students and no ink, and they can't really use them effectively. And so that's a harder problem to solve, and one that we didn't, I think, as a system, wrap our brains around too much early on.
Have you begun to address that, or are there ideas that are bubbling up?
Yeah, there's now an effort to pass out hotspots, much like the devices, but it's nowhere near on the same scale. We've spoken to some families about maybe using, if they have a smartphone, that is a hotspot. That's problematic though, because that eats up a lot of data, can be very expensive. So that's really not a long-term solution. The last thing I'll say is I've spoken to families saying, like, if you speak to your internet service provider and they say, oh yeah, your internet's fine, I would say to them, no, I need you to come to my home and see what happens when my child tries to log in to a live video conference while they're also using a document at the same time, because without that experience, they're missing out. And so I don't know how many parents are taking me up on that offer, but we're slowly trying to work through these issues.
TK, you're at a high school environment and it's a hybrid situation. What are your biggest concerns that have sort of emerged over the first couple of months of the year?
Yeah, really similar to what Mike said. I co-sign everything. To give you a little bit context, we teach in person for the first and last 2 days of the week, and then all remote on Wednesday. And since we're such a big school with over 2,000 students, we have to divide our kids into 6 different cohorts. And so in my case, that means I have to keep in track of Monday and Tuesday C1 cohort kids, Thursday, Friday C2 cohort kids, full remote kids, cohort D kids, across 5 different classes for 2 separate preps, and then homeroom and advisory kids alone. And even when I have my kids in front of me, I'm still teaching to over half of the class who are joining us remotely. So we're really hybrid in every sense of the word. And a typical hybrid is me teaching into a camera like I am right now in my empty classroom. But on a day where I have a hybrid model, then the other half of the class of the kids are physically with their laptops in class, while the other half is virtually. And then when you start adding all these additional variables, like, is today an asynchronous or synchronous teaching day? What's the school-wide schedule change going to be like? Who has tech or internet access issue? Just keeping track of our students in and of itself becomes this huge nightmare. And we as teachers aren't prepared to this degree of logistical organizational legwork, especially when our bandwidth is already filled to the brim with mastering pandemic teaching on the job. And so, there's this famous study that says, like, teachers make over 1,500 decisions a day, as many as a brain surgeon does. This year, it literally feels like we are performing brain surgery on a rocket while troubleshooting that same rocket. And we're literally occupying, especially in a hybrid model, 2 space and time dimensions. And the decision fatigue, the burnout that comes with it is real.
Wow. We'll come back to the consequences on teachers, but have you gotten any, I'm wondering have you had any help with the logistical challenges? I mean, that's a lot of executive functioning you got to do to keep all those different variables in front of you.
We had 2 weeks before school started that really helped us look at the different models that we can approach things with. I think for the most part, our administrators, similar to Nafisha's situation, have been really supportive. And so I think everyone's doing the best that they can.
Yeah, great, thank you. Shayna, back to Chicago Middle School, what are your biggest challenges?
I think my biggest challenges are not losing faith, number one, and making sure that my kids are okay. I worry all the time that they are not adequately prepared to do this work remotely. I mean, we are fully remote in Chicago, or in Chicago public schools. And I worry about not being able to reach them. I worry about engagement. I worry about being able to prepare them, not just academically, but social emotionally. I am deeply concerned about how things will look when we do return to the building. And I know that all of my colleagues are as well. I mean, as a 7th and 8th grade teacher, one of the things that we had to go through last year was having our kids graduate, and they left us abruptly in March. And it's that trying to help them process something that I don't think any of us are really equipped to process.
Mm.
But also, you know, try to give them strength and give them tools to succeed and overcome these challenges that have been placed before them this year. And just, you know, try to be there as best as I can via this computer,
Yeah. Wow. Have you had any support, any training in how to give your students the additional social emotional support they seem to need?
hmm So I'm quite fortunate to be at a school where we have and our curriculum is online through Summit Learning, and there's a mentoring component with that. So every Wednesday, every child from fifth through eighth grade, at least, is meeting with either a teacher or a another staff member to be able to just kind of intervene, right? Just to that check in. And that model was already established before we left. So I'm very grateful that we already had that in place.
Yeah.
You know, speaking to other colleagues who do not have that, I've kind of talked to them about how you can implement that in different ways. You know, just whether or not it's within your curriculum, but it's extremely important to make sure that we are connecting with our kids on a regular basis as best as we can.
Yeah. How does their the sort of stress that your students feel, the sense of anxiety, sort of uncertainty, get manifested, and how can you sort of pick up on that, as you say, via a screen?
It is very difficult. It is very difficult, especially if they don't turn their cameras on. When I'm in person, right, I can pick up on, you know, oh, their faces, it's hanging low, or, oh, they didn't really just, you know, they didn't say hi to me as enthusiastically as they normally would in the morning. Remotely, it is, well, this student is usually on top of their game. They're usually submitting their work. They're not doing that. So it's the frequent communication with parents, the constant, like I have Hangouts, chat for Google on my phone, so they can reach me whenever they want. It's both parents and students. But it's this, I feel like I'm on call. I do feel like Ms. TK was his analogy of being a brain surgeon. I feel like I'm a doctor in an ER sometimes because I need to be there.
Yeah. Wow. So thank you. So we've heard warnings. We heard warnings during the summer about teacher shortages when schools resumed this fall. You know, that large numbers of teachers would retire or resign. Sort of what's the situation in your school?
Back to me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. As of right now, I'm not really seeing any teacher shortages. I mean, there's always shortages in education, especially when we think about special education. But as of right now, what I see is a lot of people moving into positions or, you know, helping out, like all hands on deck, more staff members pushing in for support, especially when we want to do like small groups and intervention. But as of right now, I've not seen too many of those concerns, not in my school, not my network. I can't speak.
That's good. Anybody else have an insight on the issue of sort of shortages, early retirements, you know, teachers taking you know, a lot of their leave, you know, early in the year? Yeah, Mike.
I'll jump in quickly. We had, you know, one staff member, one teacher at my school retire explicitly due to COVID. We had another who is working fully remote, and I think she would have retired if she were not given that option to work fully remote. I think that, you know, there is a teacher shortage though, because we have, at least in New York City, some 20% of our teachers are working fully remote due to a health accommodation, which of course they should be granted. So that gives us fewer people in the building to educate our kids. And the other thing I'll note is, you know, the economics of schools are very unforgiving. I mean, we just barely, in a good year, have the number of people we need to educate our kids and all the resources. So that's why we all scramble when someone's absent, you know, pre-COVID, because we need to call the substitute, or we need to do all the coverages or split up the classes so that kids are being accounted for and supervised and of course educated. And so now with COVID, we have more people who are home on these accommodations. And, normally I teach 30 kids at a time in front of me. And now I'm teaching 10 at a time because of social distancing, of course. So that means those other 20 kids who I did not teach in a given period, we got to find the personnel to teach them the 7th grade science I normally would. That's why you hear talk about a staffing shortage. I don't think it's just retirement or folks who are resigning. I think it's the fact that to socially distance teach, you need more people to do it. And that's part of the tension there too.
Yeah, really interesting. In your school or in others, are we seeing sort of creative solutions to these staffing challenges? And if so, what are they? In other words, how are you getting those bodies in front of kids when you're dividing a typical class into thirds?
Yeah, just to piggyback on what Shayna mentioned before, we have a lot of people wearing a lot of hats.
Yeah.
It's not very pretty because I think the best teaching happens when you have a teacher or a team of teachers who are really doing the same work every day. I'm working with the same students. I'm teaching the same curricula. I know it well. I know my kids. We have a lot of folks serving as jack of all trades, right? They're doing 6th grade math today and then 7th grade social studies tomorrow and rinse, wash, repeat. We have our dean, we have our IEP teacher who have full-time roles already, who are being pulled out of those roles, being told to still do those jobs and also teach half a load as well. I will say this, in New York State, there's been a modification for teacher certification, and they're allowing teachers with this new provisional license, certification to teach in our state who have not yet met all of the regular prerequisite tests and such for this kind of emergency situation. It's allow us to hire more people into the system to fill some of these gaps too.
Yeah, and was that passed specifically in response to the pandemic, or had that provision existed previously?
Others like it existed previously, but there was a new one specifically for COVID.
Has anybody else seen that? No? Interesting. Okay.
Is it okay if I also add a little?
Please do.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to speak to the unique mindset that a lot of teachers, and I think also by extension, essential workers are feeling right now. Hannah mentioned in the questions, what is the sort of emotional state that we're feeling? And it's this like low grade simmer of a panic where there isn't enough of fear that would trigger a decisive action, like I have to get tested or I have to get quarantined, but like still enough that it starts to weigh on your anxiety and your mental health. At our school, we started hybrid around 3 weeks ago, and our principal has already sent us close to a dozen courtesy emails that informed us that a member of our community tested positive. There's not that many detail in these emails, except a vague confirmation that we haven't been in contact with these people, but it plants itself inside your head,
Yeah.
Last week I had to cover for 2 classes, and I work at a really big school. There's 180 teachers, and so it's not uncommon for that to happen.
Yeah.
But I can't help but think when I'm sitting in the classroom at their desk covering for another teacher, are they out because they're taking a personal mental health day, or are they out because they come into contact?
Right. So there's a basic concern about safety.
Yeah, and but it's also like this constant state of uncertainty in every sense of the word, right? That I think a lot of us are occupying right now. And I'm, relatively young and healthy, and I don't live with anyone who's older or immunocompromised, but it still weighs on me, and I can't imagine the mental toll it takes for teachers who aren't, positioned as privileged as I am.
Yep. Nafisa.
And I just want to speak to the anxiety part too. And I keep asking, like, what is really our jobs in this moment? Because, and to Shayna's point about being on call all the time, I did contract COVID and I taught through it online because in my mind, I'm like, I'm at home, I can put a smile on my face, I can still, but that took a toll on me. And it's like, I had to have my colleagues say, no, Nafisa, you're sick, you need to take a leave regardless. And so it's like, even being from home, when you don't feel well, when you are managing even your own children, because I do have kids who are in school doing distance learning so I'm listening for kindergarten and teaching 11th grade at the same time. And it's hard to even like focus on yourself. We keep saying, teachers, take care of yourself. And it's like, when am I going to do that? And so even have permission to even take a pause and take care of myself. I needed my village to tell me to do that. So that anxiety of like, am I still doing my job when I don't feel well or overwhelmed?
Yeah, really tough. Interesting. Jamina, yeah, sorry, go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, just to go off what you just said, Nafisa, and Shayna, what you were talking about in terms of worrying about students and thinking about how they're doing. This pandemic has revealed a lot of the gaps that we have at the school level or even at the district level. And one of the ones I want to talk about is our ability to communicate with parents and families. We rely so much on that in-person dynamic, and it's been really challenging for a lot of the schools that I've been in contact with, including mine, to be able to communicate and know what's going on and what are some of the reasons why students aren't completing work or even attending classes. And so that right there, especially at the beginning of the year, and less so now, but it's still a matter of working efficiently across our campus to make sure that we have a pulse on how students are doing and what they need. Because it's definitely, like Mike was saying, all hands on deck, people wearing different hats. Normally we would not have to reach out this much, but to me, our first priority should be, are our students okay? Because if learning is going to take place, then their basic needs have to be met. And so it pains me to say this, but the rigor of learning has taken a back seat because we're having to focus on students' well-being, which that's how it should be. It's amplified right now.
Yeah. Well, that's an important point for people to hear, that it's not just about teaching and learning, it's about kids' well-being, and sometimes that comes first. In fact, one could probably argue that unless students are in a good place physically and emotionally, learning is going to be pretty difficult to accomplish anyway, right? What are you hearing, Daniel? I'm curious, from parents that you're talking to about the situation at home and how your students are doing.
Well, at the risk of overgeneralizing, a lot of my communication with parents sounds like I just don't know. I don't know how to check up on my students' grades. I'm not sure how to support at this stage of my students' education. There's a lot of dependency. There's a lot of trust and you can call it respect that so many of our parents in the community that I work in, in LA, give our school. And now we're relying on parents more than ever. At the same time, it's never been easier for a student to disengage. And so my 11 or 12-year-old self would not be intrinsically motivated to log in every day at 8 o'clock, even before that, forget about it. So there's a lot that we're depending on. And we're having to not only as educators learn ourselves these various instructional strategies during distance learning, and for some of us hybrid, we're having to educate our students and our parents and guardians and all the stakeholders that students have around them. So it's quite a challenge.
Wow. Jamina, we heard a little bit from TK about his week, how it's sort of organized. Can you give us some insight into your day? Walk us through your day.
Yeah, so I expect 8-year-olds to log on at 8:15. They don't, because they're 8. So we start off, we just log in at 8:15. We have our morning meeting. And I think the biggest thing that's happening for like the first 20 minutes of the day is them just checking in with me, checking in with each other. And then I'm constantly texting parents, like everyone is saying, just saying like, okay, your kid's not here. Are you okay? Is your scholar okay? Because I think it extends more, like it's not just whether or not the student is okay, it's the entire family unit. Because since I have third graders, they rely on their sister, they rely on their mom, they rely on their dad, their grandma, whoever is in the house with them, to have them on the computer and to set them up. So that's what my morning looks like. And then I go into teaching reading. We have a long lunch break where my students insist on staying on Zoom the entire time because I still want it to feel like a classroom and like we're together. So I can hear them chatting with each other while they're like eating whatever they're eating. And then we end up with math and then English language development, which I just finished before I jumped on here.
Well, I think we gave you 3 minutes before you had to go.
Yeah, the kids were like, what are those voices? I can hear voices because I was still teaching.
Wow. So Mike, you're in a hybrid environment. Give us a little insight into what that looks like for you.
Yeah, so the way it works in New York City is we have maybe 2/3 of our students in my school, at least, are fully remote, and their families have chosen not to send them to school. The other third are coming to the building, some on some days, some on other days. It's a little more simplified than what TK is experiencing. My brain's hurting hearing him describe what's going on in LA. I'm sorry. LA? Do I have that right? Are you in LA?
No,
TK?
he's in New Bedford,
In
Mass.
Bedford. I'm sorry. Near Boston. Okay. My apologies.
Daniel's in LA.
Daniel's in LA. So yeah, that hurts a bit. So when I get to the building, we do our COVID check with the security to enter. They make sure there's no symptoms. I film videos for my students first thing, which I'll post for them later in the day to give them some asynchronous instruction, some teaching, not live, but they can go watch it on their own. So then I will meet with my colleagues. We have a coordination period. This was a new period that was negotiated with our union so that the co-teachers I have who are special education teachers who I work with, we review the lesson and the students that we want to target. I have some other colleagues who are teaching the same subject, the same grade, but they're teaching a different group of kids. And so we get on the same page about, all right, lesson, expectation, standards, assessment, all this. And then I'll teach, these days, I'm teaching one group of children in person. There's about 10 to 12 of them, socially distanced. After that, I will leave that room, go to another room, and with 2 laptops, I will teach kids in an empty classroom. And I'll teach children who are home for the rest of the day for about 4 periods.
Can I ask, is it the same instruction in the afternoon, remote, or that you do in person in the morning? Or is it?
There are definitely some modifications. It has to be because it's remote, but I try to keep it the same as best I can because the kids who are home, I want to give them that in-person experience, but also, you got to keep in mind students who may be home on Monday are coming to school on Tuesday. And so it really becomes very confusing if we start to jumble that too much. So for, coherence, I try to keep it in sync. End of the day, we have office hours. So that can be small group instruction. It can be calling parents. I then post that video I mentioned to you at the beginning of the day for kids to watch kind of for homework to get ready for the next day's lesson. And then I go home after that, I suppose. So that's kind of the typical day for me.
Does anybody else have a day that is dramatically different than what we've heard? Yeah, Shayna.
Just to speak to, I saw something in the Q&A. My school day, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday is all the same because again, we're fully remote. But Wednesdays is different. On Wednesdays, we have what we call Flex Wednesday. It used to be Flex Friday when we were in the building, but that is an opportunity for kids to figure out which class they want to go to. We do different activities like educational based, but like fun for them, right? So we have these different rotations, and that's in the afternoon portion is when we would do our mentoring. So that's every Wednesday where kids can do things like, one of the things I did was art expression. And so we went in and we are writing songs using the beat of one of their favorite hip hop songs or something like that, where, or they can go to typing class, or they can, what's another one? Play chess. Like, really we're trying to engage them. So that's every Wednesday. And then of course we have our mentoring component, so.
Yeah. Nafisa, you were going to share a thought.
Yeah, my day is very different. Or my weeks are, I teach in a small project-based learning academy within my school. And it's very teacher powered, student centered. And so what our students said when we first went to distance learning in the spring is that it's just overwhelming and there's too much to remember, too much executive functioning. And so we decided to just have focus days. And so I only teach a live class on Mondays and Thursdays. I teach all my 11th graders at one time. I do breakout sessions, and then in the morning and then in the afternoon, I have like on demand and office hours where they can do one-to-one teaching with me, or all the teachers come together on one Google Meet and we just go into a breakout room individually with students who are coming to check in with us. And so the students only have to focus on my class 11th grade all day on Monday. So if they get all their work done for the week, they're good to go. Then the next day they'll just focus on math. And that way they're not feeling overwhelmed, and they have expressed to us that they are grateful for the schedule because they don't have to manage so much. And then we just streamlined the way we post to Google Classroom. And so all of our assessments, our formative assessments are named the same thing too. So we're trying really hard to take the thinking out of trying to do the work and just get right to the learning.
Huh. So you essentially, I'm going to play this back to you a little bit and tell me if I've got it right. So you give them a week's worth of work at the beginning of the week, and then you sort of help in support of their doing that week's worth of work, you give them 2 days worth of in-person instruction. And
Actually, I get 1 day worth of in-person instruction where I'm doing like the direct instruction.
Yeah.
It's a week's worth of work. So they have a week to turn it in because they are helping with siblings or even working a job. And so we tried to consider that as well. So they have time, but they also have me available to
afternoon for
them anytime in the afternoon. And then on Wednesdays, power hour, where I'm sitting on a Google Meet, and then they know they can just jump on and talk to Ms.
Yeah.
Brown.
So do they have you all day on Monday, or is it just, like an hour on Monday?
Nope, they have me all day on Monday.
Okay.
I do direct instruction in the morning and walk through assignments with them. And so I try to get through the work for the week, but if they need like one-on-one attention, then they know that they can come to me after lunch for the rest of the afternoon to get that additional support.
Interesting. So you had to coordinate this with your peer teachers, with your colleagues, right? In order to block out all day Monday for English.
Yeah, so in my small project-based learning academy, we just have one content teacher and I teach 2 grades. And so we all came together as teachers and the admin and worked out that schedule together. So it's all coordinated, and we communicated the schedule to the students and the families and the parents. And so everybody was just on board with that schedule.
Interesting. Is that new this fall, or were you doing that in the spring too?
We pivoted in the springtime when we realized that them coming to us, the way they were coming to us wasn't working, and they were saying it was just too much to remember and they were feeling overwhelmed. We were like, okay, well, what if we just focused on one day and they just have us to themselves for that day? And the students were very grateful in the spring when we pivoted to that. And so we just decided as a team to keep it that way for the fall too.
Oh, really interesting. Thanks. So here's a question for everybody. We've talked around this a little bit, but let me ask it a little bit more directly. What's been the sort of biggest adjustment to your teaching, I guess to your instruction, that you've had to make during the pandemic? Yeah, Jamina.
I think for me personally, I miss the connection with the students and the families face to face. I mean, so when I think about this virtual context, we do get to see families and students in a more holistic way. They're not just that little body in a chair in our classroom. We see their room. We see like what their life is like at home. But I will say like that those small moments in the classroom, or like being able to walk around the room and see their work, teaching 8-year-olds how to use Google Docs is like a nightmare. So like being able to actually give them that active feedback in that moment is so much easier when you're in person. And I feel like they're able to learn faster and better because we had those systems in place, which just you don't really have a lot of those same things, that connection or that immediate feedback online as you would in person.
Are there any sort of insights you have for other teachers as to sort of how to begin to compensate for that challenge?
I say the biggest leverage for me is families and whoever's at home with the kids. Because if I can text parents and say, hey, can you take a picture of this homework assignment when you get off of work? And I think families are often asking, okay, what can I do at home? How is my child doing in class? And so throughout this time, families and their siblings and their extended families have become like the biggest leverage for helping students get what they need in the best way that we can during this pandemic.
Interesting. Others on that? Yeah, TK.
Yeah, I wanted to also speak to, I think, Sierra's question about social emotional work. As educators, we have to make sure that we're equipping our students with the tools to help them navigate the mental health and motivational issues that they're going through. We have to give them the language and also encourage them, invest them into this new reality, but also in a way that holds them accountable. And for me, as counterintuitive as that might sound, especially as an AP teacher, sometimes that means that I have to put my academic hat and the academic role on the back burner and treating our students always, right, as people first, scholars second, grace over grades. And so I think that looks like doubling down on communication and relationship building, investing in the skills to talk to and listen to our students, and being humble enough to acknowledge that there's a million ways to get our students to be these smart, problem solving and empathetic learners, and curriculum and teaching is just one of those ways. And there's this moral panic, I think, in education circles right now around our kids falling behind. And the gut instinct and reaction to that is, therefore, let's invest more in education, like academic, scholarly work, with our schools, with our teachers. And I think that really undersells what we do as educators. It really undersells the value that we bring to our students, which is really about being a part of a community and being there and supporting them holistically.
Nafisa, you want
Well,
to?
I was going to say, like, speaking to actually both TK and Jamita's point, I try to integrate the SEL and the academics together so that they're getting both. So my seniors, we study like the hero's journey, archetypal stories, but it's like, okay, now we're going to write your own hero's journey. We're going to talk about how, at one point in your life where you felt invisible and you felt empowered and came out of it. And then we're watching movies together and we're talking about it. And they're like, yo, Miss Muhammad, this is dope. I may not have done that, in the classroom, but now it's like, okay, how can this really be a partnership which really centered on them in their lives? We doing guided meditation, but I also use like my Google site as a way to like make their learning visible. So I take screenshots of their work. I take quotes that they're saying when they're talking in class and just plaster it all over my Google site so that they can see that there's learning actually happening, y'all. I know it looks weird, and they also have exemplars for each other as well. So it's like, how could I have done what I did do well in the classroom and make it virtual and then also switch it up for them so it's about them too?
Yeah, interesting. So they feel seen, heard. Yeah, great. So this brings us to the question, and TK, you sort of began to touch on it, that it is on a lot of people's minds, right? Sort of how much learning is going on, what percentage of your students are sort of engaged, even to the point of being online when you're teaching virtually, right? Being present. Can you give us a sense of that? Again, TK, you touched on this a little bit, so maybe others can share their perspectives. Yeah, Shayna.
So in terms of engagement, we typically have at least 96% attendance, but that attendance does not necessarily mean engagement, right? So this is, I thought about this because it was startling to me when grades came up, and I'm thinking about grace, and I'm thinking about all these things that, our kids are going through. And I'm going through their work, and they had this final project, right? This one final product. It was an argumentative essay. We were listening to the Serial podcast, and we were using text evidence in order to try to determine Adnan Syed's guilt or innocence, right? So out of my 48 eighth graders, I had 8 that did not submit their final product. And that was, I was terrified, though the week leading up to the due date, because my fear was that my kids aren't going to fully engage and get their work done, get this important final piece done, this piece that is unfortunately 70% of their grade, because if they don't, then what do I do? And fortunately, that wasn't the case for the vast majority of them. But overall, I would say that engagement on a typical, just in a daily class, with the certain tools that I'm using, like Nearpod for engagement, like all the, I would say on average, I'd have about 60%, 70% of kids that are actually engaging and doing the little, quick checks that I might insert in the presentation. but it's certainly not what I would have in the classroom.
Yeah, just as a rough estimate, what level of true engagement, as you've been describing it, would you typically get in an in-person classroom?
I would say about 85 to 90%.
Yeah, so it's a drop off.
And then those kids that didn't, then I would be right there in person with them. I'd be able to, exactly. And so, yeah, it would make up for it, but I can't do that now.
Right, fair enough. Mike.
Yeah, and I love how TK of New Bedford mentioned this grace over grades point, right? Like that really resonates a lot. Your initial question, Tom, was around learning and how much is happening. And I think, for, again, my 12-year-old, 13-year-old, seventh graders who are more independent, maybe more proficient, maybe more savvy, tech savvy, or savvy, just, in general, they're going to be fine. Like they're losing a bit for sure compared to being in the classroom, but they're also learning a lot of other skills. They're learning how to use technology much more deeply than they ever had before. Even this generation of kids who we think of, oh, they're so tech savvy, they're born with cell phones being the norm, smartphones, even they had learning to do since the pandemic started, and they've come a long, long way. What I'm really worried about, again, is these examples of students who are really falling behind. And a lot of them that are most worried about are the ones that are fully remote, because they're the ones, again, maybe the Wi-Fi is not great. They're taking care of younger siblings. Maybe they're not being supervised by any adults at home. But then a number of them, they'll come to class or they won't. The camera doesn't go on often. I call on them. I don't hear a response. And, Jamita hit this point before. When I see kids in the classroom pre-COVID who are struggling, you see the body language immediately. Or you walk over, you see the work, and you're like, okay, stop. We got a problem. You four, come with me now. We're going to talk about this. But when a kid's home and they're not responding to my emails and the phone calls, and they're not coming to class or the camera's not on, it's really hard to know the teacher next step, right? Like I have to make some guesses as to like, what's the first barrier we need to clear. But when I see it in person, it's much more obvious. Like, okay, here are the 2 or 3 things we got to clear up right now. And that lack of knowing, that lack of clarity makes it really hard to pull up our kids who are really struggling. So the learning for them, I'm very worried about.
Mm-hmm. Others? Jamita.
Daniel, you can go first.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about a challenge, and it relates to learning. It has to do with our curriculum. And I think this is a great opportunity for us, which is weird, but to consider what is essential. And, we're having to cut so much of what we typically teach. I've heard people use the analogy of, if our curricula is a 18-hole golf course, we're really making like a mini golf situation out of it. And it's true, because we just have less time. Zoom time is not the same as in-person time. And we're not asking, at least in my school, for students to be on from 8 to 4. We're reducing the instructional day, hoping, crossing our toes and fingers, that they're using the independent time that we give them, and leveraging other, interventions and supports, right? So thinking about what we keep, how we adapt and adjust how we teach it is really something that has been part of, we talk about doing surgery. We're having to do that internally as teachers, because we can't just copy and paste the playbook that we've been using. I'm hoping that out of this, whenever we get back to somewhat of a sense of normalcy, that we can come out with a lot more culturally sustaining and responsive pedagogy, because we're having to do that right now. I forget who said that, but someone was saying, I think it was you, Nafisa, I'm trying to marry both social emotional learning and the academics. That's how it should be. And so if we're having people, like more people realize that and be on game with that, then that's a small but important win that we can have.
Right. Jamina.
Yeah, I was just going to say that a lot of the tools that we used in the classroom are now like thrown out the window, and we had to grab another bag of tools and kind of figure that out in order to engage students. And I think that engagement with different students and with different families looks different. And so for one student in my class, it might look like her typing on Nearpod all the time because she's like a really fast typer and she's able to do that. But for another student, it might be writing on a piece of paper and then having it sent to me later on. It's also like different ways of communicating with kids, asking the question out loud, typing it in the chat, making sure that it's on the screen so they have it in different ways because Zoom is so audio centric that it's very, very, very hard for kids to engage and them even to remember the question that you were asking them.
Right.
And so I think like this has been obviously a huge challenge, but it has forced us to think of different ways to engage students and families. And like my school, which hadn't really done like cool projects before, like sure, some classrooms did, but we made an audio book with the kids. And the kids were like, what? That's crazy. And like it was so exciting for them to do something that wasn't really in the realm of what we may have done in the classroom, but it worked out on the computer because we have the book on the screen, we have the kids voice reading. So we are still able to find joy and creative ways to learn and engage even though we are online.
Well, that's very positive. Thank you for that. Nafisa.
Yeah, I just want to say shout out to project-based learning, because since I worked in a project-based learning academy prior to COVID, we just were like, okay, so what does project-based learning look like for them in their homes with what they have and what could they build and what can they do with it? So now, even if they didn't do all my formative assessment, but they're trying really, really hard to get the project done, I can then look at that and say, okay, where were the standards met? And then award credit and grades for that. And so like this reimagining, like, what are we assessing and how we're assessing it? Or I can go to another teacher and say, were you doing argument and claim and reason in your classroom? Okay, how'd they do? Okay, well then I can now give this kid credit too because they got it done, you know? And so the way we grade, absolutely to everything everyone said.
You know, so we're hearing that there are some germs of sort of optimism that have begun to take root. And I'm just wondering if any of you, any others who haven't sort of talked about the creativity that's emerged in some of your classrooms, feel that there have been upsides to what is surely a really difficult moment. No upsides?
I will say my introverted babies, the one who usually sit in the back of the classroom, who won't usually talk, are killing it. They're showing up, they're turning on their mic. There's a kid who hardly spoke. I loop with my kids. And so, you know, to see him now, you know, writing and talking and blossoming, for me, it's like, yes, you know, I you know, the babies who don't feel seen now, they matter too, but the ones who are deserve to be celebrated and, you know, I don't know, elevated too, so that they can see, you know, develop their metacognition and see like, oh, maybe we need to continue this when we do go back to school.
So you're reaching them in a slightly different way, and you truly are reaching them. Interesting. Yeah, Daniel.
Yeah, I'll echo that. There are some students who are doing better in a distance learning or a hybrid model. There could be fewer distractions, maybe less social issues, depending on who the student is. But on the teacher front, we have to really be on our game, especially if I'm teaching strictly virtually. My economy of language, the precision of my directions, everything that I give my students has to be very, very clear, because we know that the internet is going to mess up and the time is very precious. So I think that's one area, one example of a teacher skill that we're having the opportunity to refine. And I think there's opportunities for us to get better and apply them once we go back to the classroom.
Yeah. Are we seeing any increased collegiality? I mean, if you're talking about how you're what I think is a small team of teachers getting together and really deciding to deliver education over the course of a week very differently, and that was a team decision. Are others of you seeing or working more closely in different ways with your colleagues, or has the pandemic and the virtual instruction sort of isolated you further? Yeah, Shayna.
Yeah, I mean, my team, my grade level team, the middle school team, we would always collaborate frequently, but now I know to expect a call at our lunch, which unfortunately is at 10:30. And our group chat, right? So we're all FaceTiming together and we're planning, we're typing in our computers, and then also during our prep at 12:30, and then also right at the end of the day at 2:30. And I can always count on those 3 calls because what comes to us on a daily basis, I would imagine that I deal with at least 75 to 100 emails just in the course of the school day, whether it be from students needing something, parents, administration. So it really is all hands on deck at all times. And I have noticed that, I collaborate with my colleagues pretty much all day.
Yeah, interesting. So Mike, let me ask you a question in your role as a union representative at your school. It has the collective bargaining agreement that you work under been a barrier in any way or a boon in any way to these sorts of atypical, in some ways quite creative responses to the instructional needs that you all face?
I think it's a bit of both, right? We had a revised agreement at the start of the school year, and I think both parties, the leadership of my union and our district leaders, were taking their best stab at what we thought we would need for this new environment. I mentioned before, we now have this coordination period at the start of the day with the knowledge that we have more teachers who need to collaborate in more ways than ever before, whether it's around content or around common kids, whatever the case may be. We also, one of the agreements that is much to my frustration is we now have instructional lunch, where the students, to gain more learning time, are to eat in the classroom while instruction is occurring. I have never been a fan of that for so many reasons. And I'm a bit frustrated because that never existed but prior to this current agreement. I will say, I think our union leadership feels the pressure on both sides. We do have some union members who basically say school should be closed, in perpetuity, essentially, until it's safe. And it's very unclear what that means or when safe is. And again, I'm sensitive to people, especially in New York, remembering how bad it was. But at the same time, I don't think we can say to our students and our families, like, schools are going to be closed until to be determined. Like, I think we need to give them something within reason while things are in a safer place now than they were in certainly, March and April, although obviously nationwide, it's a lot worse, but in New York City, it's better than it was back then. Yeah. I'll end on this. Our union leadership feels that pressure from the other side, which is more than ever, our union leaders realize we need to show our worth, right? Like, we need to show our kids and our families, like, this is worth it. Because families and kids, they're moving. They might leave New York City and never come back. They might be finding some sort of private school or charter school or parochial school or some sort of private instruction somehow through tutoring. Like, we need to remind them that public education is important and worth it. And, the notion, I think our leaders understand, of our union, you can't just close schools, because if you just do that for perpetuity without any light at the end of the tunnel, you're going to lose parents, and we need them on our side, right? We need them to realize, like, no, I trust in my teachers. I trust in my public schools. They make a difference in my child's life. If we just disappear, then we might be their only lifeline and we're gone, right? So that's the balance. And I do not envy union leaders trying to, support both of those arguments at once. It's not easy.
Yeah. Really interesting. Those of you who are also teaching in traditional public schools, do you feel that competitive pressure from charters, non-public schools, parent pods, and the like too?
I will say that, to Mike's point, so our union right now is fighting for that, keep schools closed no matter what until we feel like it's safe. And then I hear students like, Miss Muhammad, when are we coming back? When I'm calling parents, when are y'all taking the kids back? And so me hearing students and families, and then hearing the teachers, and then some of these teachers live in areas where they're doing pods and have access and privilege. And so it's easy to say, keep it closed, it's unsafe. But in a parent's position, where I'm both a parent and a teacher, it's difficult, because I do want to advocate for my colleagues, but then at the same time, it's like, our students and our families are the reasons why we have jobs in the first place. So to just ignore their cry and their plea, this seems irresponsible and unethical to me. And then we keep hearing about this slide and these gaps, and Minnesota is one of the worst, has some of the worst educational inequities, economic inequities. And so saying keep school closed no matter what. And then our kids do get sports. They do get to go to practice, and they do get to have games. And the parents are like, how are they getting sports over education? So I'm in a very conflicted place for myself.
Interesting. All right, well, we're going to go to questions from our viewing audience, as I say, in a minute. But I did want to ask one more question to each of you. When or if you could get one thing from policymakers, from administrators, that would make your lives better, and even though each of you in your own ways have been really innovative, I would venture to argue here with what you're doing. But what is the one thing that policymakers or administrators could do for you that would make you more successful in this moment we're in? Yeah, Shayna.
For me, I think that the one thing that we should be focusing on is our students' SEL, or their social emotional well-being, right? Our kids are experiencing, and we always use this word, it's unprecedented, and as we are as well, right? But the social emotional support, not just for our students, but all of our educators. We need to ensure that there are supports in place for our kids, especially those in areas that have been hit hardest. We know that our Black and Brown and Native American communities have been hit hardest. That's where we need to be putting our resources. And it's not just for this current year, but for the foreseeable future. It was already needed. I just think that this year, 2020, has highlighted the inequities that were already there. So what I would like to see is an emphasis on ensuring that our kids are supported socially and emotionally so that they can actually reach the academic goals that we have set for them.
Yeah. So in your school, or sort of on the ground, as it were, what form would that take?
For my school, that would ensure that we have, well, I mean, I'm fortunate to have a caseworker and a counselor that are dedicated to our building. That is not always the case. But ensuring that those jobs are there strictly for that purpose, and they don't have to be fulfilling other roles. They don't have to wear other hats. That we have community organizations that are coming in and supporting the kids, whether it be for intervention or sports or something. But we have this type of community involvement where we are getting the parents involved and speaking to them, because this is trauma that is pervasive within like these communities, and it's not going to go away just because we have a vaccine.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Thank you. Danielle, were you going to add something there?
I just want to, I'll co-sign +1, +2 if I can to Shayna, to everything you said, Shayna, along the lines of social emotional learning. And I think I'm going to open up a can of worms with this, but you know, we saw how quickly the higher ed world was able to de-emphasize the importance of standardized tests like the SAT and the SAT. I'm wondering when and how the K-12 community will take a look at what's going on right now and consider how we can diversify how we measure student learning outcomes. Because at least in the community that I teach in, there's so much that's not represented in the standardized tests that we have to take. And there's a lot of pressure to continue certain traditions and practices just because we've done them for so long. Yeah. But really, that takes a back seat. And I'm not for elimination of measuring student growth. We're here to teach, we're here to educate and expand our students' possibilities through academic learning, but that's not the only way to know if students are learning. And so if we can put more, I guess the question is around policy making, right? So if we can invest more into how we can think outside the box for how we measure it.
Yeah.
Hit me
So
up.
that's very helpful. Thanks. It also segues into 2 or 3 questions that we've had that go to the question of how are you assessing student outcomes in this environment? And let me add on to that. How would you, given what you've just said, extend or expand our understanding of how students are doing beyond test scores? They're 2 slightly different questions, but they're related. So go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, it's been challenging to measure student learning outcomes. I'm trying to, as I mentioned earlier, ask myself what is essential at the end of at the semester or quarter or whatever time constraint I have. What do I want students to walk away with? And it's become more of critical thinking, reasoning, ideas and skills that live outside of just my class. But mind you, I'm teaching a foundational reading course to middle schoolers. And so to me, I know every teacher says this, my class is the most important. I actually believe that because I have emergent readers in my quote unquote classroom, and I'm being tasked with giving them the phonics and the phonological awareness skills that some of our lower elementary school teachers are doing that, right? Can you repeat the other part of the question? I got carried away.
So sure. You had said that you feel that standardized assessments, standardized tests may not be the most valuable tool at the moment, and that we should perhaps consider other sort of metrics for capturing students' success. And I think you're implying that we should maybe define success beyond a test score. So I was curious if you had any ideas about what these additional metrics might be.
I'll lean on what Shayna was saying earlier as far as a social emotional. I know it can get very abstract, but we do this as great educators already. We have a pulse. People have been talking about how we respond to students in the classroom. And I know it can be difficult to quantify, but it deserves to be part of the narrative when we are evaluating student growth, because we're not responsible for how students are when they get to us, but we can do a lot to have pushed them along the way, but not just academically, because often the data doesn't reflect what we're actually trying to measure. As an English teacher, I know that if students miss however many questions on this passage, it might not reflect their ability to identify the main idea or cite evidence. They might just need more help with the foundational reading skills. So I think there's a lot to be said there. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, that is helpful. I mean, it's a grade level issue. In other words, the tests are measuring kids' sort of expectations of students at a certain grade level, and the student may be just not there yet. Yeah, Nafisa.
Well, to answer like your first question around what one thing I would ask for, it would be for more time. If you allow teachers and parents to decide, like, you know what, I think my child does need to do 3rd grade over because 3rd grade did not serve my child well, I think they deserve that right to say that, rather than pushing them along. Because what happens, I teach 11, I've only taught high school. I get whatever educational experience those students had from kindergarten, pre-K, up until they get me. And so I am tasked with trying to figure out what that education needs to look like for them going forward. But if we could put a pause on it and give the time back to the students and to the teachers, I think we could probably fill in those gaps and then push them forward.
Thanks. I wonder if any of you had parents requesting that their students be held back for another year last spring, or whether you're beginning to hear that this fall. No. Yeah, Jamina.
I would say I had more questions from parents about whether or not we would be reviewing previous grades content. And so I think a lot of the struggle that we have right now is remediating what they may have lost or may not have been taught last year, but also still presenting that essential things, those essential skills that they need to have in order to move on to the next level. So
Yeah.
those were the kinds of questions I was hearing.
Yeah, interesting. So let me go back to the question I asked a minute ago. How are you measuring student progress? I mean, are you administering tests online? Are you doing papers? What you all teach at different grade levels, so the answer is going to be obviously different because of that. But how are you measuring student progress, and is it different than the way in which you were measuring progress pre-pandemic?
I think for me personally, it's sticky and it's different depending on what the content is. And so like in math, it's easier to give a quiz on Nearpod than it would be to do the same thing for reading. But I would say that there is a lot of like informal assessments. I also teach students how to speak English. So it's often asking them to come off mute, repeat, like say the sentence, and then taking notes on whether like how they're doing with that. But I think that as a school system, we've been forced to, like Daniel and a lot of people are saying, rethink how we're evaluating students and then come up with creative ways to actually see what students know as opposed to where we expect them to be. Where it's more so meeting them where they're at and then giving them the skills and continuing to build those skills and ideas than it is just teaching at them.
I think
Others? Yeah, TK.
Yeah, Nafisa said it well when she said, let's have more of an emphasis on project-based independent learning outcomes. And so, you know, in my class for AP research, for AP literature, like really just having these larger products where we can consistently check in, where a lot of the feedback is ongoing, where it's one-on-one, where it's those conversations that we have both online and offline around how they're doing and how they're internalizing a lot of the skills that we have. And I think as an English teacher, when you step back and when you try to understand, well, what are the core skills that I'm trying to get my kids to understand? There are things that, you know, Daniel had already mentioned: problem solving, critical thinking, self-reflection, putting your thoughts into words in a persuasive and communicative way. And I might struggle to impart a lot of those skills to a child in a virtual setting, especially when we're learning how to analyze iambic pentameter in poetry, for instance, right? But I still might be able to get them to work and develop on those skills in an offline conversation where I'm asking them to articulate why they're not invested in their school assignment anymore, or what kind of compromise they might be able to negotiate with me with an assignment that's not completed. And while I might not be able to get through my entire, you know, traditional AP literature curricula that I would have had pre-pandemic, I can still use what's happening in our world, in our society, as teachable moments to push our kids. And so to me, when I heard, you know, Daniel talk about how we measure success being differently, I also heard in that answer, perhaps there's a need to start defining and understanding school beyond just this academic lens, which is oftentimes, you know, for me, part of the shortfalls of how education policy and stakeholders tend to look at our schools. And so, you know, I'm super energized and engaged on discussions around like cool remote learning strategies and different technologies and things like pods, you know, as a content instruction, you know, pedagogue. But as a teacher, you know, especially in the type of school community that I work in, where I'm highly attentive and aware of how the academic gaps are more of a reflection of systemic barriers and inequities that are deeply entrenched in our school system, I feel like this overemphasis on academic aspects oftentimes misses the mark.
Fair enough. Mike.
So I realize we have attendees who are not full-time teachers who are able to hear us as full-time teachers. And I just want to say, as a full-time teacher, I am incredibly inspired by my colleagues around the country. And I want to say to everybody, first of all, thank you. And it's an honor to be with you guys, but like, great teaching and teachers makes an enormous difference. All right. And so I think there's a place for standardized tests. I think there's a question with it, but usually it is this blanket tool we use across all kids, all teachers, all schools, because there isn't high quality everywhere. And so we have this kind of bludgeon that we hit over the head on districts to say, do this thing to show your kids can jump over this bar, right? Well, when you've got great teaching, That's the floor. We're looking for something much bigger and better. The project-based learning, the critical thinking, the teaching you as a person, the relationship building, all this stuff. And so I know the question's about assessments, and that's very important, but like, if we invest more in great teachers and teaching, like we're going to blow past that bar. The question about standardized tests will be, obsolete. It won't even be important anymore, right? Because we have people in this call who are explaining how, like, during an international pandemic, we are redoing our entire job to serve the neediest population in our cities. Okay. So I will argue not everyone's equipped to do that right now. And if we invest more in folks like you see in this call right now to do what they're doing, you're going to have better results for kids, right? Let's make teaching the profession that is respected, like doctors, lawyers, bankers, and not something else. Other countries have figured this out. I would point out that problem. So the assessment problem, I would say, starts with an employment problem and a personnel problem.
Yeah. So thanks. So we've had a couple of questions that go to the training that you all received and your colleagues in your schools have received to teach in hybrid environments and fully online environments. Can one or two of you shed some light on that? In other words, what have your schools, your school districts, your charter networks done to help you meet the moment?
Minneapolis didn't do much. The district didn't do much. So a lot of it was within our own sites. And I was more tech savvy, maybe than like the older population is teachers. And so these teachers became the teacher experts to teach the other teachers how to set up their Google sites in their classroom and different strategies and things like that. So we became the experts that Mike is talking about, but pay us too, I'm so happy to share my knowledge with my colleagues, but I spent more time doing that than preparing for my kids to come.
Interesting. Others on the training issue?
Yeah, one of my coworkers said it was like trying to ride a bicycle while you're building it. That's what he said, like remote learning felt like, because we're trying to figure out how to use Nearpod and Google Docs and create a Google website. And like one teacher might be better at that than you are. So I think, to Nafisha's point, there was a lot of collaborating, and there was a lot of principals and administrators learning it with us. So we were all thrown into this together kind of at the same time. And so I think there has to be a lot of grace given to administrators too, because they were trying to figure this out while we were trying to figure it out, while kids are trying to figure it out. So that's just something to keep in mind too.
Is your charter school in Denver, Jamina, part of a network?
Yeah, we're part of Rocky Mountain Schools, but we're also part of Denver Public Schools. So we're both.
Oh, so you're both. So are you getting training from those levels, from the network and from the school district?
Mostly from the network. We don't really receive as much. Well, that's not true. We do receive some training from the school district. So it was kind of like a hybrid of both, but then also responding to teachers and asking, okay, what didn't work in March? What do we absolutely need to do well when we come back in August, so that students feel successful and teachers feel successful and families feel supported?
So was the network levels support helpful or not?
Yeah, I think it was helpful, because we were responding to the communities that we work with, and we were also asking teachers, what do they need? What do you want to be different? So there was a lot more teacher voice too.
Yeah, thank you. So Nafisa, let me go back to you for just 1 second. Mike gave a very thoughtful answer about the challenges that teacher unions are facing, but you're in a district, Minneapolis Public Schools, that has a strong union. And you did something totally out of the box. It must have conflicted with many different aspects of the collective bargaining agreement, which, by the way, is negotiated by two sides. So tell us how that played out in your school. How were you able to do that, given the contract that you work under?
Can you clarify your question?
Yeah. So did you run up against any sort of district rules and regulations, like number of minutes that teachers have to be in front of students, any collective bargaining contract provisions, like teachers must get a certain number of minutes a day for prep period, these kinds of things. Those are just two random examples. But was there any challenges that you and your colleagues had to deal with from the bureaucracy broadly defined that you had to overcome?
Seat time was probably the biggest one because of how they're quantifying how much time we are spending teaching. And so as long as I have these hours open for my students to come to me, then it satisfied that.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of discussion from, admin around like, are we satisfying the minutes that we're serving? And so I'm like, the instruction, the formative assessment, the summative assessment, all that satisfies it. But how are you quantifying teaching is my question, and so we're doing the job as long as we're doing the job. And then our admin ended up supporting us in the end, but there was a big debate around it.
Yeah, but you figured it out in the end. So either you
Yeah.
were able to sort of address the regulatory needs, if you will.
Absolutely. It's just the way, it's like add them up, it's the way that we, and then like Google Meets now allows you to see how long a kid was on a Google Meet, when they came to you, when they left as well, or Nearpod tells you how much time a kid spent on something else. And so we can, add up the time that we're spending doing the teaching, then we can justify that we're satisfying those minutes.
Got it. Thanks. Okay, let me look at a couple of the other questions. So we've got like a lot of questions, and unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to all of them. So, all right. So a couple more questions about grades. We've talked about tests. People are curious to know how you grade students. Are you giving grades? If so, is it the same kind of, sort of way in which you're deciding who gets what grade pre-pandemic? Yep, Mike.
I'll chime in and say we are giving grades, and basically there's two categories for kids who pass. We'll give a number grade like we typically do, 80%, let's say, as an example. But we also have no option to fail students. We can't give them a failing grade, which I think, overall is the right call. And so there will be this label of course in progress for kids who have a failing grade by the number, or for students who did not complete enough work to determine what their grade is. And so I think it's a little more forgiving. At the same time, it's still rewarding some of our students. Daniel mentioned this before. We have some students who are doing the best they've ever done remotely, and I think they should be rewarded for that. They find a way to rise to the occasion now, and if they've got a 90 average or whatever for the first time ever, I would like to reward them for that. So we're balancing those competing interests.
Okay. Others, how are you doing it?
We are grading. We're not giving out any Fs, but we're giving out no credit, which, is the same thing. And so again, our team of teachers, we were like, okay, then what is our grading scale? What is the threshold for no credit? It was pretty low, so that we're trying to really assess progress rather than proficiency. And that's how we arrived to the grades.
Right. Shayna, you were going to share your thought.
When we first started this back in March, we had third quarter and fourth quarter, the directive was to not issue failing grades. At the time, it was A, B, C. And then for the final semester, we did pass or incomplete. Now we've moved back to the traditional model. Since we started off the school year, we planned for it. But yeah, there's the directive from our admin up, that we should not be considering failing grades, that the grace that needs to come into play. So traditional grading, but I did not see any failing grades. Mm-hmm.
Okay, fair enough. TK, what are you doing? I'm just curious.
I was going to say, similar to everyone else, I feel like for me, because I do project-based learning, grades have always been sort of this long process where there are multiple check-in points. I'm definitely more flexible with deadlines and trying to make sure that some kind of conversation is taking place. And so when a kid misses a deadline, I'm mad. I get mad less of the fact that they missed the deadline, but more of the fact that they didn't communicate. And so the follow-up conversation then becomes, why didn't you communicate? What happened there? What kind of solution can we think about? And ultimately, I feel like those are the more important teachable moments that I'm kind of instilling in my students how to be self-advocates for themselves. And so, another, I think, big issue that a school like ours with so many teachers face is that we don't have everyone on the same page. And so there are teachers like me who are like, you missed that essay. I want to make sure that you get it in time by this day. Can you give me some kind of solution for what day that looks like? And the child says, that's great. But then there are other teachers who are like, well, it's an accountability issue. You get a failing grade. And so, just finding everyone to be on the same page has been, I think, a difficulty.
It's interesting, if I can just share quickly, having read a fair amount of psychology about sort of how to support students in this moment. There's pretty strong consensus that what matters most is signaling to kids that they're cared about, that they're being heard, that adults are concerned about them in a variety of different ways. And that if there's a little less learning going on, and there's, which includes, maybe a test or two, or a paper or two not submitted on time or whatever, then that's kind of okay, and not to sort of dismiss completely the importance of mutual responsibility and deadlines and the like. But and it sounds like UTK have found a way to sort of bring kids back around to the obligations that they in fact have, but in a way that is supportive of them. Well, we're just about out of time. I can't believe we've been at it for an hour and a half already. I mean, you have all been sort of incredibly insightful and informative, so thank you. I'd like to give you each a chance to just share a concluding thought. Why don't we start with Daniel?
Oh gosh.
No pressure.
No pressure. I'll emphasize a couple of things that are kind of resonating with me and that I'm taking away. Value students, value teachers, give students a reason to want to connect. A lot of students don't necessarily come to school with an intrinsic motivation. And now that they're having to take more steps that are foreign to them to get their education, it's up to us to make sure that we're meeting their basic needs so that they feel connected to either their teacher, their class, or their school. And so classroom culture, school culture, it can be a big leverage. But thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. It's very thoughtful. Shayna.
First off, let me just say I really appreciate this opportunity and getting to be here with you amazing educators here. I think the most pressing thing for me is making sure that SEL remains in the forefront during these times. And then also educator mental health is another big concern of mine. It's not enough to just say, go, take a bath or wind down. No, like these are critical times, and we need all hands on deck. And that's just not the educators, but all hands on deck to ensure that our country survives from this. And in order to do that, we need to ensure that the weakest link, which often is our kids, right, and in certain communities, that they are fully supported so that we can make the gains necessary in order to overcome what has transpired this year. And we can only do that if we are fully supporting the people that are involved in supporting our kids and our communities. So, yeah.
Thank you. TK.
I want to stress the importance of spaces like this, where we're all co-constructing what it means to be an educator, reimagining what the function of a school is, what our role and responsibility to our students look like. And it's the thoughtful educators that are on this panel. It's the thoughtful educators who are in the participants who help make that. And I oftentimes we hear folks saying, I just can't wait to get back to normal, but there isn't going to be any normal because things weren't working beforehand. And so the conversations that are having right now are going to be the blueprint for how we're going to move forward. And so, engaging and leaning into these conversations and making these connections to the best of our ability, especially in this tech connected situation, I think is deeply uplifting to me.
No, thanks. Jamita.
Yeah, so to echo what everyone else was saying, it's been really great to have this conversation and to just like listen to other educators around the country with everything that's going on. It's very easy to feel like an island, especially given being in the remote context. But as I'm walking away today, one of the big questions I'm thinking about is something that you said, Daniel, which is what is essential? What is essential for kids and families to walk away with after this time? What is it important for stakeholders to understand about school and what school means to the community? Because I think that it's shown that we have all of these big gaps already with systematic oppression, but also with like things that we didn't know what families didn't have until we got in this situation. We didn't know that they had issues with food security in some cases. We didn't know that they didn't have internet. And so building those connections between the classroom and home is so essential and something that I want to continue to work on. And then I think the final thing is just asking policymakers to listen to educators and listen to families and make sure that that communication stays open. That is the only way that we are going to move through this situation. And like Shayna was saying and TK was saying, things are not going to just get back to normal. There's just no world in which they would get back to normal. And in a way, I don't want them to get back to normal. I want to continue to build these connections with families. I want to value social emotional learning, and I want to make sure that we have social justice as part of our system as well. So that's what I'm walking away with.
Visha, you get last word.
Last word would be systematize it. When we first went into this distance learning, we were talking about how we're feeling like the sins of our fathers. We're feeling all the inequities that have already existed, but we're feeling them more now. But we also are getting more resources, more help, more consideration, all these things that we've always needed. We're getting a lot more that the kids are getting devices and hotspots and things like that. So hold on to that. That would be like my takeaways. Like if it's working now, it will work whenever we go back into school. So keep it. Don't take it away. And teachers are essential workers. I don't think anybody realizes that, but we are essential workers too. And so we should be the ones that policymakers are listening to.
Well, that's a great and very positive note to end on. I will say to our audience that you can get a video version of this conversation on the Future Ed website in a couple of days. We'll have it up there. And I want to thank you each personally for participating in this conversation. I've learned a lot myself, and it's I think inspiring is probably the right word to know that there are educators like you doing this hard work at this hard time. So on behalf of everybody, thank you.